This is the Cold Cut Eyes on Them. Hello, I'm Olivia.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Natasha.
This is a 6-episode podcast centered around the two deaths, the disappearance and murder of Amy Mihaljevic, the mysterious death of Tiffany Valanci. The first 3 episodes are centered around Amy, and the last 3 episodes are centered around Tiffany. We are here to bring attention to these unsolved and mysterious cases. On October 27, 1989, in Cleveland, Ohio, the Mihaljevic family at 3:14 p.m., Jason Mihaljevic, the son, had called his mother, reporting that his 10-year-old sister, Amy Mihaljevic, had not come home yet. At first, Margaret, the mother, did not worry and told her son to just wait. At around 3:30, Amy called her mother and had a very brief conversation, telling her about her trying out for the choral group. However, Amy's mom found this very unusual because Margaret said she was a little chatterbox. Jason called his mom again, saying that Amy still had not returned. Amy rushed home and returning home. At 4:30 p.m., she went down to Amy's school, to the school building, seeing it was closed. Amy's aqua-colored bike was left at the bicycle rack, alone. While recalling the event and discovering the bike, Margaret said, "I knew right then it was something terrible, disaster." She recalls, "I never said it, but that bike, I was sick. I was shaking. I knew something had terribly happened to Amy." Margaret immediately went to the Bay Village Police Department, reporting Amy missing. Her disappearance, according to police, was immediately classified as a child abduction. At 7 p.m., before night fell, a full search was on. Countless of volunteers joined the search with authorities, scouring and networking with friends and neighbors who might have seen Amy. On Saturday, October 28, 1989, the FBI was informed of Amy's disappearance. Special Agent Dick was assigned Amy's case. The community had persisted the search for Amy Mihaljevic. However, on February 8, 1990, 3 months after her disappearance, Amy's body was found on a silent stretch of County Road 1181. A jogger found Amy's body. She had been forcibly struck on the head, then stabbed twice in the neck, and sexually assaulted.
So the first 72 hours after a person goes missing are the most crucial part. I think that the community's effort was extremely important to finding Amy. However, in hindsight, I think the efforts didn't seem like it was worth it.
Media coverage also added to how critical it was to the search for Amy, and media coverage was also extensive, especially in Ohio. Did the media help with discovering evidence for the case?
Yeah, I think the media allowed people who saw Amy to give a timeline when she was last alive and who she was with. So like in the beginning of the case, the evidence was relying solely on eyewitness testimonies.
At the Bay Square Shopping Center, people saw Amy speaking with a white male, estimated to be around his 30s. Police released a description of the man seen with Amy.
The media has a huge part to play in this case. In Ohio, this case was widely covered. With how widely it was covered, why do you think the man was not identified even with the description?
So what we have seen in a lot of cases, just in general, is that these people change their appearance and or their behavior at the time of the crime. So he also could as well.
But why do you think no one who knew him could notice a change in appearance or behavior at the time?
So I think based on the behavior component, Dick Wren said that he could have been an isolated individual who lives alone and doesn't have a social life.
Yes, according to the behavior composite, it said he won't fit in with his peers very well, especially with women, adds Lord. And people who know him will describe him as odd or difficult. It's likely that he was living alone with a single roommate or maybe with his parents' house. The killer was most likely to have undergone some sort of dramatic change in his behavior, personality, or appearance. It's in the weeks preceding the crime. He developed a sudden compulsive or obsessive disorder experienced with a personal giant change or emotional setback. According to the authorities, they believed he was bold, brazen. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had no hesitation. He did not have any regret or remorse for what he did. How accurate, though, do you think this composite is?
In class, we talked about how profilers aren't accurate about half the time, and in solved cases, profiling is helpful. about 83% of the time, usually.
Yeah, I like to agree with Natasha on that. So how unhelpful do you think this composited or criminal profiling can be in unsolved cases? Do you think they can mislead investigations away from the actual perpetrator?
I feel like that could have been a mistake the FBI could have made. The composites could have been confirmational bias for them.
We also emailed a journalist named James Renner who mentioned that this mistake, he mentioned this in his book he made by the FBI, was that the lead investigator was so sure it was this one guy that he then realized he was wrong too late. So by the time that the investigation was like almost done in a way, they literally were on the wrong path.
Yeah, I believe authorities investigated 120 potential suspects but ruled them all out. I don't think they investigated thoroughly, and they should have had maybe revisited some of those suspects.
I think what also adds to the case still being unsolved is the evidence was left behind as minimal, and when the murder takes place, the DNA was not enough to create a profile. So currently there's still DNA testing now that is pushing the case forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. We also have learned from the head investigator on a bunch of these websites, even on the FBI website, that they said that in October of 2024, they said that it would probably be 6 months to a year that they would even be able to have the technology to find out who the DNA belongs to, because they know it belongs to a male, but the technology from 1989 to even 2025 isn't strong enough because the DNA was so minimal.
Yeah, and kind of circling back to the beginning of the case, how reliable do you think the eyewitness accounts are? Do you think the reliance on eyewitness accounts at the beginning of the case helped or hinder on solving it?
That eyewitness testimony is really I think it's complicated because on the one hand, this case really was built up around this because we just didn't have that much DNA evidence. But I also think that there's so many different parts and stories to this that it's like, well, what's true, you know? Because some people claim that they saw her in a green sweatsuit going with this man, and they made a whole criminal profile the police did. But also, it's like we said in the beginning, how accurate is that representation of that person, you know? Something that I think is helpful that isn't necessarily a witness report, but it's just information that the police had gotten from just, I guess, people around, is that the man who called Amy had also called other girls that looked like her, I think it was 8 to 10-year-olds, white children with the same sort of haircut, brown hair, and that's how they were able to find that she was called and he had asked her this.
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't just the eyewitness accounts, though. I feel like it was just the reasoning for making this case so hard was when it happened. If it happened in more recent years, it probably could have been solved faster with DNA and new technology. Yeah. I also think maybe the genealogy that can come from the DNA that was found. Also, the mistakes that kind of were first made about the confirmational bias, like Natasha brought up, like how one of the lead FBI agents were so stuck on one person. I feel like it was so much.
Yeah, I agree. I think also something that was huge is in Bay Village, Ohio. Of course, this town is like the suburbs. It's a relatively white area. People think it's super safe because nothing of this sorts had happened, or at least had been reported. So this case really was the first child abduction that had been reported to the police that created such a huge spark. So it's like, not only was the perpetrator able to get away with this, but I think he also had an idea that this wasn't an area that people would be like, stranger danger. Yeah.
I think that was a great place to end off. Thank you for listening. This was the Cold Cut Eyes on Them. Watch the next episodes where Natasha talks about the revitalization and of the case, and Hannah discussing about the interview we had with Mr. Renner, the journalist. And Thank you so much.